I am still excited for the day ahead because for our retail investors and those investing in the space specifically, we have a special treat for you all today. He is a good friend and partner to all of us here at Benzinga Cannabis, Alan Brochstein. You probably know him from New Cannabis Ventures, from 420 Investor, from MarketFi. Alan, I see you there, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Just trying to get my presentation up. Give me one sec.
Oh yeah, you take your time. You take your time. I'm hoping Alan is going to give us the secret to making all the money in cannabis. I doubt I'm going to get that secret, but you all may, and I think this is exciting. I do, I mean, if you wanted to give us some insight on where Sundial is and going, I wouldn't argue, but that's there's like a look of worry and confusion on your face right now, Alan.
I'm just
it's
trying
beautiful.
to get this to work. I'm not worried or confused.
Oh, never.
So
Alan has all the answers,
screen, but I can't see. Am I just sharing one screen?
I don't see your screen shared at this point in time.
Okay, hang on a sec.
Yeah, you may be a different window option there. Zoom gets us all. I have 2 mute buttons now with my microphone, and I swear every single day I miss it and just start talking with a mute button on. There you go.
I'm in
Perfect.
business.
Yeah.
We're a couple minutes early, so I can talk a little bit longer, right?
Yeah, man. I'm going to let you take it because they're here for you. Alan, again, a leading, knowledgeable person when it comes to investing in cannabis, and he's going to tell you why right now. Alan, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, thanks, Elliot. And it's a tough act to follow Michael's presentation. And for any of you who saw that, you can tell I might have had a look of worry just a moment ago, trying to get the technical down. But when I hear stories like Jushi and many of the other ones right now, what a great place we're in right now. I've been following the space for a long time. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, but just a little bit about myself. I'm sitting here in Houston. It is approximately 60 degrees warmer today than it was a week ago. So I'm glad it wasn't last week because I was without power. That would not have been fun. So this is my background for those that don't know me. I've been following the space for 8 years full time. And the funniest thing about me is I've never owned a cannabis stock, which sometimes I have to think about my business models. But it makes sense for me to not own cannabis stock so I can be as free of bias as possible. So it's a funny thing. So just a little bit about what I do. I have 2 businesses. One is 420 Investor, which I do in partnership with Benzinga on their MarketFi platform. And it's a subscription-based service. Like I said, that launched 8 years ago, almost 8 years ago. And it has a lot of different features. So obviously, this is something that people pay for. I also have a service that's free, New Cannabis Ventures on the right. And so beyond no paywall, the biggest differences are there's a lot of information on New Cannabis Ventures and not a lot of analysis, really. The analysis goes to my paying subscribers, but there's one nice exception, our weekly newsletter. People in the industry love it. And it's the one time I put my editorial slant into what we publish. But it's a great way to stay on top of the industry if you're not already familiar with it. So with that, let's talk about today. So we just had a big change with the federal elections, and I'm going to talk about what that means. And then I'm also going to share some ways that I think you can think about how to invest now, given this information. And also how not to invest, and we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So for those that aren't familiar with the politics of federal legalization and what it means, we've had a real problem the whole time I've been covering the cannabis space. We've never had the federal government have any sort of desire to move forward on getting rid of the total hypocrisy of having cannabis on Schedule 1, having it be an illegal substance. And the House, actually, which was controlled by the Democrats a little bit more narrowly now, but still controlled by the Democrats, made some historic moves last year, but they were for nothing because the Mitch McConnell would not let anything get to the Senate floor. So that's really what we've been dealing with. And so now We have a Democrat-controlled Senate, but with a big asterisk. It's not really that controlled. They're sharing committee leadership, for example, and any sort of legislation to pass would require 60 votes. So if you really think about it, we've made a giant step towards progress, but the pace of that progress is going to be limited by the fact that the Democrats can't just do what they did in Canada a few years ago and legalize. There's no mandate to do so. They don't have enough votes to do so. So it's going to take some negotiating. So the last Benzinga conference took place in October, and this is a slide. I just copied it. I just put what I said in October in the title. But if the Democrats take the Senate, and of course it took us a couple months to figure that one out due to the special election in Georgia. But I think this is important to go over because I think it helps frame where we are right now. So I said that I expected a big rally due to expectations of full legalization. And I also pointed out, as I just mentioned, that full legalization is complicated and will take a long time. And we'll talk about that. But the main issues are interstate commerce, taxation, social equity, and how it's going to be regulated by the FDA or what have you. And so I also mentioned that there are some risks to the status quo. Right now, the status quo is awesome. We have a whole bunch of multi-state operators or MSOs that are growing revenue very rapidly, raising capital, generating profits, redeploying that capital. All that's great, but the future could be a little bit different, and I'll discuss that. So I said then this could be a rally to fade. Now, good news, I didn't sell the next day, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And when I say I didn't sell, I mean in my model portfolios at 420 Investor. The long term, as I mentioned back in October, a few months ago, that there's some fantastic potential changes that fall short of legalization, including credit cards being able to be used, mortgage debt being available, higher exchanges becoming an option, and more research, which is very important. So what I said in conclusion was it should be a big catalyst in the short term. It should raise some questions, and that it's a solid long-term driver. So there was a big rally. The one on the left shows the index, the Global Cannabis Stock Index we published at New Cannabis Ventures over the last 6 months. And just to kind of walk you through this, I have to be careful. So the first election was down here. The Benzinga conference was down here. The first election took place, and Biden being elected president was probably perceived, not because of him, but because of his vice president, was perceived positively. We got a little bit of a rally, but we really took off in January. So I think I had that one right, that the Democrats taking control could lead to a big rally. Now, in all truth, I was very nervous up here about the price action, and I did something I very rarely do. I raised a ton of cash in my model portfolios at 420 Investor, and it was literally a one-day decline of 17%, and I put most of it back to work. So I don't really try to time the market. We can talk about that later, but I did kind of, that was my reaction. I got really nervous this day, went to cash and redeployed it the next day. And we're a little bit lower now. You can, for some perspective, you can see on the right as well, from those March lows, we're up a ton. This was done as of last Friday, by the way. So what's been really interesting about this rally, and it's infuriating to some people, frustrating to others, maybe some don't understand it, but I certainly understand it. The Canadian LPs have been doing better than the American MSOs. And this is rather perverse. The American MSOs seem to be in the best position to benefit from the state elections that took place in Arizona and New Jersey, as well as potential changes like uplisting. And so you can see on the right how the MSOs have performed through Friday. And for the most part, they've trailed. And you can see some really odd performance from Tilray and Afria that have gone up just a ton, and really good performance from the other large LPs. So what's going on is that on the left, these all trade on the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. On the right, they don't. And so this is something I've been talking about at 420 Investor and even writing about at New Cannabis Ventures, that this is just a technical situation. And you have services like briefing.com that I subscribe to, that when they say things like Virginia is set to legalize, then they'll put Tilray, Afria, Aurora. It's crazy, but the traders out there don't understand that that the real beneficiary are most likely the American companies. Now, we can talk about it. I think that the various large LPs, they may be able to enter the United States, but there's a really terrible argument. The argument is that these are well-funded companies and they can raise capital more easily and deploy it effectively. And the reality is none of these companies have been very good at deploying capital. This has been proven, that while the ones on the right have been very effective. And for the ones on the left, the Canadian LPs enter the United States, the ones on the right will be uplisted and it will make it more equivalent. So what now? So recently the Senate leadership has made some positive statements about advancing cannabis legislation. Well, of course. So this isn't a surprise. The market took it very favorably. But so far, there's been no new legislation introduced in the Senate or the House. So what really matters? If you're a cannabis investor, don't pay as much attention to this federal stuff. I'll talk about why in a moment. This is what really matters. We have this state-by-state legalization. It's a little bit complicated. Every state's different. No, there's no interstate commerce. It's a big pain in the ass, but it works. And so that's the first point. And as I mentioned earlier, in the elections, there were 4 states that went from having, actually, that's not true. When there were 4 states where the voters approved legalization, one of them, they didn't even have medical. That was South Dakota. But in any event, 2 red states, very small states, voted, and it's not a big deal. But Arizona and New Jersey are very big deals. First of all, as I've been discussing, these are states where for really almost the first time, we have a situation where the publicly traded companies are already in these states. So it really has this very quick feedback into the publicly traded stocks. You know, when Colorado legalized, publicly traded companies weren't even allowed to own cannabis dispensaries or grows. So things have really changed. So Arizona and New Jersey legalizing were important for that reason, but also one of the things I talked about in my last Benzinga presentation and in other places was this domino effect, where when New Jersey legalized, it would set off other states wanting to do so. And this is through the legislative process, which is a better way to go legal. We saw Illinois go legal this way, and it's been a great success. And so just this year, Connecticut, Delaware, New York, Rhode Island, and Virginia have all made statements, either the governors or the legislature, and there's even been legislation introduced in some of these states. So we're already seeing this play out, and it makes sense because these states need tax revenue, and plus they know that this is going to happen anyway. They might as well move forward. It makes sense for their citizens, and popular vote is behind it. So the domino effect is taking off. This is what matters. And finally, another thing taking off is California. California is often talked about as one of the largest global cannabis countries. It's just a state. This is the place. And it's been a rough time for the last 3 years since they went legal. It was a very complex process where they tried to go from an unregulated medical market and to introduce, sorry, I didn't silence my phone, to introduce both adult use and medical at the same time, which was really crazy. That if you look at Canada, if you look at California, if you look at any state that's new, one of the keys to success is having distribution, i.e. having stores open. And California opened without legal stores and without enough legal supply. The black market, the illicit market was winning for a long time, but now the illicit market is taking heat. Maybe we can talk about that. So what to expect? I think the federal developments will be slow. I think it'll be a very optimistic outlook where we shouldn't see any interference at all from the federal government. We should continue to see very robust growth in both revenue and profits for the MSOs, and we should continue to see new state markets opening up. All three of these things should make you feel very bullish about the industry. Doesn't mean to buy today, certainly didn't mean to buy 2 weeks ago, maybe buy today. There's some other things that are happening that are really supportive of a bullish view. So we've seen more institutional investment. Most recently, GTI, for example, was able to raise $100 million the day after its SEC registration went effective from a single unnamed institutional investor. I later uncovered another institutional investor that I wasn't even familiar with, but they put about, I think 7%, maybe it was 5% of the 7% of their money into GTI, which was about 5% of GTI. We've seen some others like Wasatch get involved, Putnam. So this is a big change. I've been covering the space for 8 years. I knew this day would come. It is here. Institutional investors have figured out how to get into our market. This is just beginning. Also, one of the problems for these companies has been access to capital. And so the equity markets seem to be opening up, but debt has been really tough, very expensive to borrow. And they've had to rely on sale leasebacks with IIPR, very expensive. Talk more about that in a moment. So the debt, we're starting to see the debt capital become more available and at better rates. So now that these companies are cash flow positive in their operations, debt makes a lot more sense. Before you'd be taking on debt without having the ability to properly service it. So this is a good thing. And also another thing to expect is M&A. We've already seen a lot this year. It's going to be mainly public companies buying private companies. Just yesterday, Verano went public very recently, and they announced what amounts to about $100 million acquisition in the state of Arizona. We've seen Air buy publicly traded Liberty. That deal will go through soon. We've seen Cresco Labs buy publicly traded Bluma. Both of those transactions were public companies, but they were single state operators. So let's talk about what you're here to learn, which is how do you make money? So I think, there are a lot of people who, there's a hashtag now, MSO gang, MSOS gang. I don't participate in it. I think it's very chauvinistic. It's, I think the best way to make money in the market is to open your mind to that there's a lot of different ways to make money. So my first statement is do not go all in on just MSOs. There are other ways to play, but the MSOs are a great way to play. There's going to continue to be high growth. We're going to see consolidation. Consolidation is usually thought of as, okay, I'm going to go find the companies that are going to get bought. But I think you should think about it more as I'm going to invest in the companies that are going to be able to buy private companies on the cheap. So we're starting to see those, like Columbia Care has done a great job on this. We're going to see a lower cost of capital, and that means a higher equity price, all things equal. And most importantly, there's a shot at getting listings on the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. Game changer. There's nothing more important than this right now if you're an MSO investor, in my opinion. Now, I have to say there are some risks. So first of all, CBD was thought to be legalized in November of 2018. This was not true. Hemp was legalized, but CBD was put into purgatory. It's still not legal to sell the CBD. People do it. The FDA has said, they're going to regulate it. They've been very slow. It's caused a lot of problems. So imagine what happens if the FDA wants to regulate the cannabis industry. Terrible. Now, I don't think this will necessarily happen, but it's my responsibility to make sure people are aware that this could happen, and we'll have to adapt to that if so. Another thing that people don't talk about, right now, many of the large MSOs with multi-state operations, obviously is MSO, they have small production facilities spread out across the country because there's no interstate commerce. Now, I'm not sure we're going to get interstate commerce, but if we do, these assets could become what's known as stranded assets, where these companies are on the hook for expensive lease payments to IIPR, for example, and they're not the best assets. What you really want are large production facilities, not a bunch of small, inefficient ones or less efficient ones. So single state operators, I just mentioned that Bluma Wellness and Liberty in Florida have been acquired, and that's not supposed to be it. And so we've seen that, and there are a few other single state operators that could be acquired, or even some small publicly traded ones. Don't expect hookups right now between large MSOs. Regulatory issues constrain them. So an SSO is easier to acquire, or a small MSO. The regulatory issues are, for example, you can't have 2 licenses in Florida right now. Massachusetts similarly. So all these states have controls over how many stores you might be able to have, or production facilities. So the M&A gets complicated for larger companies. Verano went public. They didn't have a presence in Florida and Arizona. AltMed did. They bought AltMed. So that's the kind of thing to expect. So it does favor SSOs. Honestly, there aren't that many SSOs left. There's a few. But I want to talk about the hidden potential upside beyond M&A, and that's the opposite of the stranded assets. There are a few companies out there that have large-scale production facilities that would really benefit from the ability to ship out of state. And I'm not necessarily suggesting investment in them, but I will tell you 3 of them off the top of my head. So the parent company just went public. That would be 1. Indus Holdings would be 2. And while they've had some financial trouble recently, Flower One in Nevada would be 3. There's more, and there's some that are private, obviously, as well. Copper State in Arizona might be a good example. So this is something to think about as well for the SSOs. As I mentioned earlier, don't put all your eggs in the MSO basket, in my opinion. Ancillary is great. Now, I'm happy to see that people are investing in these companies now. We're seeing more of them. Hydrofarm went public, Agrify went public. There's been a lot of interest in GrowGen, which I followed for many years. People didn't care about these in the past, but these can be some great companies. Urban Grow just uplisted to the NASDAQ. Weed Maps is going public through a SPAC. So we're starting to see more of these. So this is another way to capitalize. These companies don't pay 280E tax. So if that's going to take a while to resolve, better after-tax cash flow on these kind of companies. So back to my point from earlier, I like smaller Canadian LPs, not every single one of them, but some. I like Canadian retailers, not every single one of them, but a few. But the big Canadian LPs are probably not the way to play US legalization. You have 5 big LPs, 2 of them are merging, Aphria and Tilray. Canopy Growth is set to lock in the acquisition of not a very good company, in my opinion. I'll just leave it at that. And they're sitting on $1 billion, but I think GTI could raise that overnight if they were uplisted. They've already pretty much proven that. So they're also very beverage focused, which is probably not going to be the best way to capitalize on the market. That's more of a long-term driver. So then you have absolutely nothing from Aurora. They have no US. They have the ability to buy part of Australis, which has nothing. So those are 2. Then you have Aphria Tilray. They're playing it the CPG route. They have absolutely no access to any existing US cannabis assets as of this moment. And then the one that I find most interesting is Kronos Group. Kronos Group, as you know, has Gotham as big investors. Gotham owns or controls MedMen and Ianthus, which have some good assets, not good companies, but good assets. And you can imagine that that might be a way, plus the strategic partnership with Altria. So I don't want to say that they're so bad you should never own them. There are some ways they could participate in the US market, but I think if you really want to participate in the US market, these MSOs are probably the best way to play. So the takeaways, and I'll go to Q&A. We have an improvement in the federal regulatory environment, but the timeline's very uncertain in what it looks like. State by state legalization is working great. Full legalization is complicated, but there's some things that could happen, like uplisting particularly, but also access to mortgage debt, for example, or being able to take credit cards that would be beneficial. And finally, this huge rally in the large Canadian LPs is a technical thing. It's not driven by fundamentals. So I appreciate your interest this morning. I think we have time for some questions. If you want to learn more, here's how you do it. Elliot.
Yeah, definitely have questions in the chat. There's never not a question for you, Alan. Let's start with a good one from Z Zelek. A question for Mr. Alan Brochstein. MSOs should focus on wholesale or retail long term? I know that's a complex question, but throw it to you.
Yeah, it's a simple question and a complex one. And I don't have a great answer. Here's my answer. They should focus on what they're best at. And so when you think about the cannabis space, there's been a lot of vertical integration. And what that means is, like, let's take Canada, for instance. In the early days, every gram of cannabis that was sold had to be produced by the seller. There were no, it was all seed to customer, essentially. And in Florida, that's the case right now. So every state's a little bit different, but just like every other industry in the world, I mean, think about the beer industry. You don't see Anheuser-Busch selling out of their stores. I don't think there's Anheuser-Busch stores. So there are some MSOs that are going to be really good at retail. It doesn't mean they can't do these other things. And right now, like we just heard from Jushi earlier, they have a real retail emphasis, and that's really where they're trying to excel. Ellie, I know you asked them about using data. Mm-hmm. So I think that everybody is going to have to be good at what they want to be good at. And the idea of we're going to be the best at everything is not a good way to go. So that's really my answer. The most value, it depends on the market. In a federally legal market, I think that the value would be created in both, honestly, in wholesale, making the products, and in retail. Now, I will say this, you got to be really careful because the cultivation side can become very commoditized. Now, you can make a lot of money in a commoditized market, but you have to be growing in a large scale facility with a low cost of production.
Very interesting. I mean, look at Tilt. Tilt Holdings is one that, I feel like are supporting other MSOs. Mm-hmm. That's just my own example that comes to the top of my head. A couple other questions. I think you did touch on this, but I don't think it hurts to go a little bit deeper. If when MJ is federally legal, does it pay to own a cannabis brand, or should we be more interested in a quote unquote Amazon of cannabis / pick and shovels? Thoughts on how many brands there are right now?
Yeah, so I would say right now, I'm not going to pick on Cureleaf when they start talking about how they have the best brand. It's just not true. There are no brands yet of the caliber of beer brands, cigarette brands, all these other CPG brands. There are some brands that are developing, and there are good brands, but there's not that dominant brand yet. This will come, but there's no reason to think that you can't make money investing in the brands itself. That's for sure. As far as the Amazon, sorry. Let me stop sharing my screen real quick.
You're fine. I don't see it actually on mine.
So as far as the Amazon of cannabis question goes, I think
will that be Amazon?
Yeah, it might be Amazon. Is true. I do say that, but I'm trying to give an updated version of that. So it just depends on, do we have interstate commerce or not? I mean, I think one of the best things for the cannabis industry during the pandemic was that we were finally able to have online ordering with either delivery, kind of the Amazon experience. Not exactly. Couldn't use your credit card. You had to do something different. And it wasn't the prime person and all that, but it was pretty close. And I think that was a game changer. So when we start to see interstate, you could see a large company that last mile. A lot of people are focusing on the last mile, but I think there's a lot of ways to win, Elliot. And one shouldn't put all their eggs in one basket.
Here's another question. This is actually a personal question for me, but it does address a bit, I think, of what we have a couple members in the chat looking toward here. I talked to Michael Auerbach on Cannabis Hour a couple weeks back, and he was talking about CanDoc potentially, or will be listed on the NASDAQ in the future. Is that something that, while we have the obstacle of 280E here in the US, that we should look more to the international markets like Israel, like maybe a Mexico coming online?
So I don't usually do these predictions at the beginning of the year, or I don't put a lot into them, but I did this year say that for the first time, international is worth paying attention to. And it's been on the back burner for me for years, and things haven't lived up to their expectations. I noted sometime in Q4 how rapidly the Israeli medical cannabis market's evolving, and also how legalization appears to be imminent there. And so there are a lot of different ways to play. You mentioned one, CanDoc, with the SPAC that hasn't closed yet. And then another one is I Am Cannabis, which is uplisting Monday. And I actually think this is very interesting because you have companies that are generating revenue that seem to be market leaders, and now they're going to have higher exchange access. And, in the past, I would have said, if you want to invest for international, and you have Clever Leaves trading now too, by the way, not the Israel thing, but international. So in the past, if you wanted to invest in the international theme, really the only way to do it was through an LP, and you just took on huge market cap to do so. And so I think investors are fortunate that we're starting to see these new developments right now where, for example, they can pinpoint into Israel, get that higher exchange. So without me endorsing these, because I'm not going to at this moment, but I think this is a very positive development.
Well, and Alan, I mean, you cover all of this on New Cannabis Ventures, and I do want to shout out that I read your site daily. So one of my favorite places to get updated information, of course, along with Javier and his team at Benzinga Cannabis. Can you leave us with a last thought here, and really specifically toward those that are excited about potential cannabis markets?
Oh, I'm so glad you're giving me that opportunity. And people are going to think this was scripted. And I don't want to be leave on a negative note, because I am so bullish. I told my subscribers at the end of Q4, we were up 61%. Usually a nervous Nelly like me would be saying, whoa, hold on, be careful. But, I think one day I said, put the pedal to the metal, and people are like, who is this guy? So I do want to say we are starting to see a lot of enthusiasm. And I see this through the number of people that subscribe to 420 Investor increasing, or the people who sign up for our weekly newsletter at New Cannabis Ventures starting to really pick up after a long lull. And so and it's obvious in the prices and the trading volume. And there's great reason to be excited, but we're up 60% year to date. I just did the math the other night.
Wow.
If you do that and you annualize it, it means we're going to be up like 1,455% or something like that at the end of the year. And it's not happening. So what I try to do for my subscribers at 420 Investor, and what I want to do for our audience here, is to just set the expectations realistically. Now, I think you can make money if you go all in today. You may be feeling hurt in a few days or weeks. So I just want to caution to be very careful. I talk to this about daily with my subscribers. I don't have a crystal ball, but I know the setups are not great right now, especially for these large LPs. So I'm not going to tell you they can't keep going up, but I can tell you I'm a little bit cautious right now. And so the message I'd like to leave is you should be very bullish on cannabis. In my opinion, things are moving in the right direction. I think there's a little bit of confusion right now about the beneficiaries. The media kind of pushes the wrong tickers. The right tickers are doing very well. They're great buy on dip. If you have any doubt, buy half your position now, because they may keep going up. The setups can get worse. They're not so great right now. They're getting a little bit better as we kind of flatline recently. So that's where I leave it.
Fantastic. Alan, a huge pleasure to have you with us as always. There are a ton more questions in our YouTube chat if you want to hop in there and take a look at those. Either way, the information that you are providing is available on New Cannabis Ventures, and I highly recommend subscribing to 420i. Outside of that, Alan, always a pleasure, and we will see you next time, sir.